My fingers, gnarled and callous from decades of needlework, traced the worn metal of my old singer. It wasn't just a sewing machine, it was an extension of me, a silent witness to every dream I'd stitched, every sacrifice I'd made. My name is Irene Castillo, and for 72 years, I've been weaving threads, first for others, then for my family here in San Antonio. This machine, a faithful companion since I was a young woman, has seen more of my tears and triumphs than anyone. Its hum was a soundtrack to my life, a constant reminder of the endless hours I poured into making sure my children had more than I ever did. I remembered the early days, the late nights under a single bare bulb, mending clothes for neighbors, crafting quinceañera dresses, anything to bring in a few extra dollars. My own needs, they always came last. The frayed edges of my own life, the dreams I'd quietly set aside, were all stitched into the fabric of my children's futures. I believed, truly believed, that every penny, every hour, every aching back was building a strong foundation for them, a fortress of family where we'd all be safe and loved. My eldest, Marco, now 45, always had a way of charming me into anything. When he was just starting out, fresh out of college, he'd come to me with his grand plans, his eyes shining with ambition. "Mama," he'd say, "this business idea, it's going to be big. Just need a little seed money for the tuition for the first few months." And I, foolishly perhaps, would dip into my meager savings, the money I'd put aside for a new, less temperamental sewing machine, or maybe even a small trip. His college tuition, all paid by my nimble fingers, was just the beginning. I saw it as an investment in his future, in our future. Then there was Sophia, my only daughter, 40 years old, with her expensive tastes and a flair for the dramatic. Her wedding, a lavish affair that cost more than I cared to admit, was another testament to my unwavering belief. "Irene, Mama," she'd plead, "it's my special day. I just need a little extra for the catering, for the flowers." The down payment for this very house we lived in, the one with the chipped paint on the porch and the rose bushes I tended so carefully, that too came from my savings, a lifetime of small commissions and careful budgeting. I wanted them to have a beautiful home, a place where they could raise their own families, a place of comfort and security. It wasn't just the big things. It was the constant drip, drip, drip of smaller requests. Marco needed new tires for his car. A loan he promised to repay, but never quite got around to. Sophia always had a new vacation she just had to go on, or a designer handbag she couldn't live without. Even Carlos, my youngest, 38, who mostly kept to himself, would pop up with requests for the latest gaming console or a new gadget, always with the same innocent, expectant look. And I, like a fool, always said yes. My heart would ache a little, knowing it meant another month of stretching every dollar, another year without that new sewing machine. But the hope that flickered in my chest, the hope of a united, grateful family, always won out. I remember one sweltering afternoon, the kind where the San Antonio air hangs heavy and thick. I was in the kitchen, kneading dough for tortillas, my back protesting with every movement. The voices of Marco and Sophia drifted in from the living room, hushed but clear enough. "So, the trip to Cancun is still on?" Sophia asked, her voice light and excited. "Yeah, just finalized the bookings this morning," Marco replied. "Carlos is meeting us there a day later." A cold knot formed in my stomach. Cancun? They were planning a family trip? My hands paused mid-knead. I hadn't heard a word about it. No invitation, no mention, nothing. It was just assumed, I realized, that I wouldn't be part of it. The dough felt heavy, suddenly, like a stone, in my hands. The hum of my old singer, usually a comfort, seemed to mock me from the other room. It was then, in that quiet, sun-drenched kitchen, that the first tiny tear in the fabric of my belief began to show. I was stitching their dreams, but it felt like I was slowly, meticulously stitching myself out of their lives. A few weeks later, the sting of the Cancun trip still lingered, a dull ache beneath my ribs. Sundays used to be my favorite. The house would fill with the familiar sounds of my children and grandchildren, a symphony of laughter and chatter that always warmed my heart. Now it felt different. I'd spent all morning in the kitchen, preparing a feast, carne guisada, fresh tortillas, arroz con gandules, even a flan for dessert. My back throbbed, but I pushed through, telling myself this was what family was about. This was how I showed my love. When everyone finally gathered around the dining table, the air was thick with their conversations, but I felt strangely invisible. Marco, ever the talker, was recounting some elaborate story about a new client, gesturing wildly with his fork. Sophia, next to him, kept interjecting with her own anecdotes, mostly about her latest shopping spree. Carlos, as usual, was quieter, mostly focused on his plate, occasionally nodding along. "Mama, this carne guisada is good, but you know, that new place on Commerce Street makes it with a bit more spice," Marco remarked, barely looking up as he piled more onto his plate. He said it casually, as if it were an objective fact, not a slight to the hours I'd spent slow cooking the meat to perfection. My hands, busy refilling Sophia's water glass, paused. I just nodded, a familiar tightness in my chest. "Oh, speaking of Commerce Street," Sophia chimed in, turning to a friend who was also at the table. "Remember that amazing lunch we had at La Panaderia last Tuesday? We have to go back. Their conchas are divine." She went on to describe the outing in vivid detail, laughing with her friend, completely oblivious to my presence, or perhaps deliberately so. I had been home that Tuesday, mending a tear in Carlos's favorite jacket. The thought of being invited, even just once, to one of their casual outings felt like a distant fantasy. My daughter, my only daughter, never thought to include me in her social life. Later, as I cleared the table, piling dirty dishes into the sink, Marco started complaining about some financial woes with his latest venture. "It's just these unexpected costs, Mama," he sighed dramatically, running a hand through his hair. "Everything is so expensive now. You wouldn't believe." I dried my hands on a dish towel, a lifetime of careful budgeting and making do bubbling up inside me. "Marco," I began gently, "maybe you should look at your expenses more closely. Remember how your grandfather used to say, a penny saved is a penny earned. Sometimes cutting back on the small luxuries can make a big difference when you're building something new." He laughed, a short, dismissive sound that cut through me. "Mama, with all due respect, things are different now. It's not like running a little sewing business. You don't understand how the market works, how investments are made. It's a whole different ballgame." He waved his hand, dismissing my words, dismissing me, as if my 72 years of navigating life, of making every single dollar stretch, counted for nothing. The air left my lungs. It wasn't just his words, It was the tone, the casual arrogance, the way he looked at me as if I were a relic from another time, incapable of understanding anything beyond a needle and thread. I felt a flush creep up my neck. Here I was, still cooking for them, still cleaning up after them, still listening to their problems, and my wisdom, my experience, was worthless. I turned back to the sink, scrubbing a plate with unnecessary vigor. The clatter of cutlery seemed to echo the emptiness I felt inside. I had given them everything, poured my very essence into their lives, only to be told I understood nothing. The seed of insignificance that had been planted weeks ago when I overheard them discussing Cancun had now taken root, growing into a thorny bush of disrespect. It was clear then I was no longer a valued part of their tapestry. I was just a thread they occasionally pulled on when they needed something, a thread they were ready to snip clean off when it no longer served their purpose. The betrayal, I realized, was already well underway. The sting of Marco's dismissive laugh still echoed in my ears days after the Sunday dinner. I found myself retreating more into my small sewing room, the familiar rhythm of the machine, a comfort against the growing chill in my heart. I tried to push away the feeling of being an outsider, telling myself it was just a phase, that my children were busy with their own lives. But the quiet hum of the singer couldn't quite drown out the nagging doubt. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Sophia came to me, her face a mask of concern. She rarely visited during the week unless she needed something, and a familiar knot tightened in my stomach. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, a stack of papers clutched in her hand. "Mama," she began, her voice softer than usual, "I need your help with something important. It's about the house." My heart gave a little flutter. The house, my house, the one I'd poured my life savings into, the one where I'd raised them all. "What about it, mija?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Well, Marco and we've been talking," she explained, carefully avoiding my gaze as she shuffled the papers. "We're looking into some opportunities to secure our future, you know? And the house, it's a big asset. We just need to get some things in order, legally speaking, to make sure everything is protected." She spoke in vague terms, using words like opportunities and securing our future, but never quite explaining what those opportunities were or whose future exactly she was talking about. It felt like a conversation I was only half privy to, like listening to a play from behind a curtain. I remember Marco mentioning similar things a few weeks prior during a phone call I'd overheard. He'd been on speaker with Sophia, talking about leverage and maximizing potential for the future. I dismissed it then as business talk, something beyond my understanding. Now, seeing the papers, a flicker of unease went through me, but it was quickly overshadowed by the familiar desire to help my children. "Protected from what?" I asked, trying to understand. Sophia waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, just general legal stuff. Taxes, market fluctuations, things like that. It's just a formality, Mama. We just need your signature on a few documents to show that you're in agreement with our plans for the house. It's for the best, really, for all of us." She pushed a document across the table. It was thick, filled with small print, and written in legal jargon that made my head spin just looking at it. My eyes, though still sharp for a needle, blurred when faced with such dense text. I trusted my children. I always had. They were smart, educated. They knew about these things. It's just to update some records, to make sure the house is properly set up for the family's long-term benefit, Sophia elaborated, her tone earnest. We don't want any issues down the line. It's just a simple legal adjustment, nothing to worry about. I picked up the pen she offered, my hand trembling slightly. A part of me, a small, quiet voice, urged me to read it, to ask more questions, but Sophia was already tapping her foot impatiently, a slight frown creasing her brow. I saw the familiar expectation in her eyes, the same look she'd given me when she needed money for her wedding, or when Marco needed tuition. It was the look that said, Mama will always help. Of course, mija, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Whatever you think is best for the family. I truly believed I was still a crucial part of our family tapestry, that my signature was just another stitch binding us closer. I was so used to being the one to provide, to sacrifice, that the idea of them manipulating me, weaving me out, seemed unthinkable. I signed where she pointed, my signature a shaky testament to my unwavering trust. I didn't read the fine print. I didn't ask for clarification. I simply signed, feeling a sense of duty, a quiet satisfaction that I was once again contributing to their well-being. Sophia smiled, a quick, relieved smile, and gathered the papers. Thank you, Mama, she said, almost too quickly, before hurrying out the door. As the door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the quiet kitchen, a strange chill settled over me. It felt like a piece of me had just been given away, a silent transaction I didn't fully understand. I told myself it was for the best, for the future, as Sophia had said, but deep down, a new, unsettling thread had been woven into the fabric of my life, a thread of unease that would soon unravel into something far more devastating. I had walked blindly into the trap they had so meticulously laid out. The weeks following Sophia's visit, when I'd signed those papers, passed in a strange, unsettling quiet. The usual stream of requests for money, the casual drop-ins, the boisterous Sunday dinners, they all dwindled. Marco was too busy with his new venture. Sophia had travel plans with friends. Carlos, always the most elusive, simply stopped answering his phone. The house, once a bustling hub of family life, grew eerily silent, its emptiness echoing the growing void in my heart. I told myself they were just busy, that they'd come around. But the silence stretched, day after day, into a chilling void. Then came the letter. It wasn't addressed to me. It was a utility bill for the house, addressed to the occupants, but with Marco's name printed clearly in a smaller font below, and stamped boldly with "Return to sender," moved, no forwarding address. My hands trembled as I stared at the red stamp. Moved, no forwarding address. My breath caught in my throat. They had moved, all of them. Without a word, without a goodbye, they had simply vanished, leaving me, Irene Castillo, alone in the house I had helped build, the house I had poured my life into. The papers I had signed for Sophia, for the family's future, flashed through my mind. What had I signed? What had they done? A cold dread seeped into my bones, colder than any San Antonio winter. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy, as I dialed Marco's number. It rang, and then went straight to voicemail. The subscriber you are trying to reach is unavailable, a chipper voice announced. I tried Sophia, same result. Then Carlos, again, voicemail. Panic clawed at my throat. This wasn't just busy, This was deliberate. This was abandonment. I tried again, my voice hoarse with desperation, when Marco's voicemail picked up. "Marco, it's Mama. Where are you? Why aren't you answering? The mail. I got a letter. Please call me back. What's happening?" Hours later, my phone finally buzzed. It was Marco. My heart leaped, then sank at the sound of his voice. Distant, annoyed. "Mama, what is it? I'm really busy right now." "Busy?" I choked out, tears stinging my eyes. "Busy doing what? You left. All of you. What about the house? What about me?" There was a pause, a sigh that carried across the phone line, heavy with impatience. "Mama, look, we decided to move on. It was time for a change. You're fine. You have the house. It's all yours now." "All mine?" I whispered, utterly bewildered. "What are you talking about? What about the papers Sophia made me sign?" Another sigh, this one laced with a hint of irritation. "Those papers were just to make things official, to put the house solely in your name. We thought you'd be happy. You always loved that house. Honestly, Mama, you're being a little dramatic. We just needed to get our own space, start fresh. We'll call you when we can. Don't be so needy." Needy. The word hit me like a physical blow. Needy? After everything? After every sacrifice, every penny, every late night? After giving them my entire life, I was needy for wanting to know why my own children had vanished without a trace. But why didn't you tell me?" I pleaded, my voice cracking. "Why didn't you say goodbye?" "It was for the best, Mama." Sophia's voice surprisingly cut in. She must have been with him. Her tone was cold, devoid of the warmth I remembered. "We knew you'd make a fuss. It's better this way. You have the house. You're set. We're just trying to live our lives." The line went dead. They had hung up. I stood there, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone, a sound that felt like the final, definitive snap of a thread. The betrayal, sharp and brutal, tore through me. Humiliation washed over me, a hot wave of shame that I had been so blind, so foolishly trusting. I stumbled into the living room, the room where I had watched my children grow, where we had celebrated countless birthdays and holidays. Memories, once comforting, now felt like ghosts mocking me. Marco's boisterous laughter, Sophia's bright smile, Carlos's quiet presence, they were all here, in every corner, in every faded photograph on the mantelpiece. I sank onto the worn sofa, the one I'd reupholstered myself years ago, and the tears came, hot and furious. I cried for the years of sacrifice, for the love I'd poured out, for the family I thought I had. I cried for the woman who had believed with all her heart that her children would cherish her, not discard her like an old, worn-out garment. The pain was physical, a crushing weight on my chest. But as the initial storm of grief began to subside, a small, stubborn ember flickered deep within me. Needy? Dramatic? No. I was Irene Castillo. I was a seamstress. I had built a life with my own 2 hands, stitched together a family from nothing. They might have tried to unravel me, but I was not broken. Not entirely. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, a new kind of resolve hardening my gaze. "All mine?" Marco had said. "You have the house." My house, the house I'd made the down payment on. I needed to know the truth. I needed to understand what those papers meant. With a newfound determination, I pushed myself up from the sofa. My first independent decision, clear and unwavering. I would go to the county clerk's office. I would find out what was truly mine. The silence in the house was no longer just an echo. It was a heavy blanket, suffocating and cold. After Marco and Sophia's callous phone call, I spent days and a daze, moving through the rooms like a ghost in my own home. My small apartment, as Marco had called it, was now just a house, filled with memories that felt like sharp shards of glass. I sat for hours on the sofa, the one I'd reupholstered, staring at the faded photographs on the mantelpiece. Each smiling face, each shared moment, now felt like a cruel deception. My years of sacrifice, of pouring my heart and soul into them, had been repaid with abandonment and a dismissive, "Don't be so needy." The humiliation was still a raw wound, but beneath it, slowly, something else began to stir. Anger, a cold, steady burn that started in my gut and spread through my veins. Needy? I had been the backbone, the provider, the one who always said yes. They were the needy ones, always taking, always expecting. My first act of self-protection came almost instinctively. I remembered the times Marco and Sophia had asked for money, always with the promise of repayment, always with access to my bank account, just in case. I pulled out my old checkbook, the one with the worn cover, and found the numbers. The next morning I walked to the bank, my steps resolute despite the tremor in my hands. I sat across from the teller, a young woman with kind eyes, and calmly explained that I needed to remove all authorized users from my accounts. She looked at me with a hint of concern, but processed the request without question. As I walked out, a small, unfamiliar lightness lifted from my shoulders. It was a tiny step, but it was my step. Back home, the silence still pressed in, but I refused to let it consume me. I walked into my sewing room, the old singer waiting patiently. For so long, my sewing had been for others, mending, creating, always with a client or a family member in mind. Now, I looked at a bolt of vibrant blue fabric I'd bought years ago, intending to make a dress for Sophia. I picked up my scissors. No, this was for me. I would make myself something beautiful. It was a small rebellion, a quiet act of defiance. I started to look at things differently. Every past interaction, every casual request, every dismissive comment, they all clicked into place, forming a clear, ugly pattern. Marco's business opportunities that always required my seed money. Sophia's emergencies that always coincided with her desire for something new. Even Carlos's quiet requests, which I'd always seen as innocent, now felt like part of a larger, unspoken agreement among them. They hadn't just taken from me, they had played me, manipulated my love and trust like a fiddle. The realization was a bitter pill, but also strangely liberating. The blindness was gone. A few days later, needing to clear my head, I walked down to El Corazon Cafe, a small, cozy spot just a few blocks from my house. I rarely went out, usually preferring to cook at home, but the thought of another silent meal was unbearable. The owner, a woman named Elena, with a warm smile and eyes that held a lifetime of stories, greeted me. I'd known her casually for years, a nod and a quick chat when I passed by. "Irene, it's good to see you," Elena said, pouring me a cup of café con leche without me even asking. "You look like you could use a friend today." Something in her voice, in her genuine concern, broke through my carefully constructed facade. I found myself, almost without thinking, telling her bits and pieces of what had happened. The abandonment, the phone call, the needy comment. I didn't go into all the details, but enough that she understood the raw pain of betrayal. Elena listened patiently, her gaze steady and compassionate. When I finished, she reached across the counter and gently squeezed my hand. Irene, she sighed. Some children, they forget where they come from. They forget the hands that fed them. But you are a strong woman. I have seen you work, seen you carry your family. You deserve respect more than anyone. Her words, simple and heartfelt, were a balm to my wounded spirit. It's just, I feel so foolish, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. So used. Foolish? No, mija, Elena said firmly. You loved. You gave. That is never foolish. They are the ones who are foolish to throw away such a treasure. But you, Irene, you still have your dignity, and you still have your strength. Don't let them take that from you, too. Her words resonated deep within me. She was right. They had taken so much, but they couldn't take my spirit, not if I refused to let them. As I walked home, the San Antonio sun felt a little warmer, the air a little lighter. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. I deserved respect. I deserved more, and I was going to find a way to get it. My journey to the county clerk's office, which I had planned in a haze of anger, now felt like a pilgrimage, a defiant step towards reclaiming my story. The next morning, armed with a newfound resolve, fueled by Elena's kind words and my own simmering anger, I made my way to the county clerk's office. The building was a grand old structure, intimidating with its marble floors and hushed atmosphere. My heart hammered against my ribs, a mix of apprehension and a strange, defiant hope. I approached the counter, my voice a little shaky, as I explained I needed to look up the deed for my address. The clerk, a young woman with a patient smile, typed away at her computer. The minutes stretched into an eternity. I gripped my worn handbag, my knuckles white. What if Marco was right? What if I had signed everything away, leaving myself with nothing but memories and a house I couldn't truly claim? The thought made my stomach churn. Then she looked up, a small smile playing on her lips. Yes, ma'am, here it is. The property at Irene's address is currently registered under the name Irene Castillo. My breath hitched. Irene Castillo, I repeated, almost disbelieving. Are you sure? Yes, ma'am, she confirmed, turning the screen slightly so I could see. There, in stark black and white, was my name, Irene Castillo. Not Marco, not Sophia, just me. The papers Sophia had made me sign, the ones I'd blindly trusted, had indeed transferred the house solely into my name. Their attempt to secure the family's future by manipulating me had, ironically, secured my future. A wave of something powerful, something akin to exhilaration, washed over me. It wasn't just my name on a piece of paper. It was a reclamation. It was proof that my sacrifices, my investment, were still legally mine. The house, the symbol of my years of labor, was truly mine. I felt a surge of empowerment, a strength I hadn't realized I possessed. They hadn't managed to erase me completely. From the county clerk's office, I walked with a lighter step, a spring in my stride I hadn't felt in years. My next stop was a lawyer's office, one I'd found listed in the local paper. Mr. Ramirez was a kind man, his office filled with stacks of legal books and a comforting scent of old paper. I sat across from him, feeling respected for the first time in a long time, as I recounted the story of my children's abandonment and the discovery at the clerk's office. He listened intently, nodding occasionally. Mrs. Castillo, he said, his voice calm and reassuring. This is a clear case or outcome. The house is legally yours. You have every right to it, and to do with it as you please. We can explore several options. You can live in it, rent it out, or if you wish, sell it. Given the circumstances and your previous financial contributions, you are in a very strong position. He outlined my options, explaining the legalities in a way that made sense, patiently answering all my questions. He wasn't dismissive like Marco, or vague like Sophia. He treated me as a capable, intelligent woman, not a needy old lady. The feeling of being heard, of having my rights acknowledged, was a powerful tonic. I felt a sense of control returning to my life, a quiet strength blooming within me. While I was meeting with Mr. Ramirez, unbeknownst to me, the threads of my children's carefully constructed lives were beginning to fray. Marco's new venture, the one he'd claimed was so promising, was hitting snags. Without my steady stream of seed money, his cash flow was drying up. I imagined him, pacing his new, presumably lavish apartment, making frantic calls. Sophia, too, was likely feeling the pinch. Her extravagant lifestyle, funded by my unwitting generosity, was suddenly unsupported. I pictured her staring at her credit card statements, the reality of her financial dependence on me slowly dawning. Even Carlos, who had always seemed to manage his own finances, probably relied on the general stability my presence provided, the safety net of the family home. They had taken my support for granted for so long. They hadn't realized how completely they leaned on it. Back home, I started to gather evidence, not just for a lawyer, but for myself. I pulled out old bank statements, the ones detailing the large transfers to Marco for his tuition, the checks written to Sophia's wedding planner. I found faded photographs of the house when we first bought it, before I'd spent countless weekends painting, gardening, making it a home. I even found letters, old birthday cards where they'd thanked me for everything. Each piece of paper, each photograph was a tangible representation of my worth, my investment, my love. It wasn't just about money. It was about the years, the effort, the heart I had poured into them. This evidence wasn't just for a legal battle. It was a testament to my truth, a quiet reaffirmation that I was not the needy one, but the one who had given and given and given. And now I was ready to take back what was mine. The decision to sell my share of the house to the bank wasn't made lightly. It was a wrench, a tearing away from years of memories, but it was also a definitive act of self-preservation. Mr. Ramirez had explained the process thoroughly. Since the house was solely in my name, I had the legal right to sell it. The bank, seeing the clear title and the property value, was willing to buy my equity, allowing me to access the cash quickly. It was a practical solution, a way to reclaim my financial investment without the protracted battle of a full sale on the open market. I walked into the bank, not with the trembling hands of a few weeks prior, but with a quiet, steely resolve. The same young teller who had helped me with my accounts greeted me. This time, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty in my voice. I spoke clearly, firmly, outlining my intentions. The bank manager, a serious-looking man, joined us, explaining the paperwork. I read every line this time, every clause, every tiny detail. My signature, though still that of an older woman, was steady and deliberate. As the pen lifted from the final document, a profound sense of liberation washed over me. The house was no longer a symbol of my sacrifice and their betrayal. It was a testament to my newfound independence. The immediate aftermath was a strange mix of relief and a lingering sadness. But the sadness was quickly overshadowed by the frantic calls that began to flood my phone. My children, who had dismissed me as needy, were now the ones in desperate need. Marco called first, his voice laced with a panicked edge I'd never heard before. "Mama, what have you done? The bank just called me, asking about the house. They said you sold your share. What does this mean?" I took a deep breath, my grip tightening on the phone. "It means, Marco, that I have reclaimed what is mine. The house was in my name, and I chose to sell my share. It's a legal transaction. But we were counting on that house," he sputtered, his usual charm replaced by raw fear. "My business, Mama, it needs collateral. We were going to use the equity for an investment. Your business, Marco, is your responsibility," I replied, my voice calm, unwavering. "Just as my finances are mine. You told me I was needy for asking questions. Now I am simply taking care of my own needs." I could hear Sophia's voice in the background, hushed and urgent. "Mama, please," Sophia cried, taking the phone from Marco. "You can't do this. Where will we live? We moved out of our rental. We were planning to move back into the house once things were settled. This isn't fair." "Fair?" I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Was it fair when you abandoned me? Was it fair when you manipulated me into signing papers without explanation? Was it fair when you called me needy for wanting to know where my own children had gone?" There was a stunned silence on the other end. They hadn't expected this. They had expected me to fold, to cry, to cave. But the old Irene, the one who sacrificed everything, was gone. "Irene, you're being unreasonable." Marco's voice came back, strained. "We can talk about this. We can work something out." "There is nothing to work out, Marco," I said, my voice firm. "My decision is made. I have taken control of my own life. I wish you well." And then, with a strength I hadn't known I possessed, I hung up. The phone rang again and again, from Marco, from Sophia, even a hesitant call from Carlos, who sounded genuinely confused and upset. I let them all go to voicemail. I had enforced my boundaries, finally, after a lifetime of letting them walk all over me. The silence that followed was no longer suffocating. It was peaceful. A few days later, a family gathering was scheduled at my sister Elena's house. I hadn't been invited, of course, but something compelled me to go. I dressed carefully, choosing a dress I had made myself, a vibrant blue one, not the one I'd originally intended for Sophia. I walked into Elena's bustling home, the familiar chatter and laughter instantly quieting as I entered. All eyes turned to me. Marco, Sophia, Carlos, even Elena, who looked surprised but gave me a small, knowing smile. I stood tall, my shoulders back, my gaze steady as I met each of their shocked faces. "I am here," I announced, my voice clear and strong, "to make it clear that my decisions are final. My life, my choices are my own now. I will not be manipulated, nor will I be taken for granted. This is my boundary, and I will not tolerate disrespect." The silence in the room was deafening. Marco looked pale. Sophia's eyes were wide with disbelief, and Carlos, for once, looked directly at me, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. I had transformed, not just in their eyes, but in my own. The victim was gone. In her place stood Irene Castillo, empowered, dignified, and finally in control. The confrontation at Elena's house had been the final cut, a clean severing of the threads that had bound me to my children's expectations. I didn't wait for their apologies, which I knew would be hollow, or their attempts to manipulate me back into their lives. I simply stated my truth and walked away. My new life unfolded in my small apartment, the one I had once called my house, but now truly felt like my home. The money from selling my share of the house gave me a sense of security I hadn't felt in decades. I no longer had to worry about stretching every dollar or about the next emergency my children would present. The old singer, my faithful companion, hummed a different tune now, one of freedom, not obligation. I still sewed, but it was for pleasure, for myself, and sometimes for the neighbors who appreciated my craft and my company. Elena, the cafe owner, became more than just a confidant. She became a true friend. We'd sit for hours at El Corazon, sipping coffee, sharing stories, and sometimes just enjoying the quiet company. She introduced me to other women in the community, women who valued my wisdom, my experience, and my laugh. I started volunteering at the local community center, teaching basic sewing skills to young mothers and teenagers. It was a joy to see their faces light up as they learned to mend a tear or create something new. Giving back without expectation of anything in return filled a void I hadn't realized was there. It was a different kind of stitching, one that mended not fabric, but spirits. Meanwhile, the consequences of my children's choices began to unfold. I heard snippets through the grapevine, through distant relatives and mutual acquaintances. Marco's new venture had indeed faltered without my financial backing. He'd apparently lost a significant sum, leaving him scrambling. Sophia's lavish lifestyle, unsupported by my funds, became unsustainable. I heard she had to move back into a smaller apartment, and her social circle, once so vibrant, had thinned considerably. Carlos, always the quiet one, seemed to be the most affected by the family rift. He had always been more observant, and I imagined he was grappling with the full weight of his siblings' actions and his own complicity. There were no more calls, no more desperate pleas. The silence from them was now a consequence, not a weapon. I often thought about them, of course. They were my children, but the pain was no longer sharp. It was a dull ache, like an old scar. I had grieved the family I thought I had, and in doing so, I had found the family I truly needed, myself and the supportive community around me. One evening, as the San Antonio sky bled into hues of orange and purple, I sat by my apartment window, a cup of herbal tea warming my hands. My new sewing machine, a sleek, modern model I had bought for myself, sat quietly in the corner, a testament to my renewed purpose. I looked out at the familiar street, at the lights twinkling on, and felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. Irene Castillo, the resilient seamstress, had not just reclaimed her financial investment. She had reclaimed her dignity, her worth, and her own story. The threads of trust had indeed frayed, but I had learned that the strength to mend them, or to weave an entirely new tapestry, lay within my own heart. I smiled, a genuine, satisfied smile, as the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon. For the first time in years, I felt truly, completely at peace.